George Michael was one of the most celebrated pop stars of the 1980s and 1990s, with a voice that could melt hearts and a charisma that kept him in the spotlight for decades. From his early days in Wham to his legendary solo career, he created timeless hits like Careless Whisper, Faith, and Freedom. 90. Yet behind the glitter and fame, George Michael had a sharp tongue and wasn't afraid to call out fellow artists and entire bands he didn't respect. What made George so fascinating was that he wasn't one to throw around cheap insults. His criticisms often came from a place of genuine frustration, whether it was about artistic integrity, fake personas, or music that he simply couldn't stand. Unlike many celebrities who played it safe, George Michael spoke his mind openly in interviews, sometimes even shocking fans with the bluntness of his words. In this video, we'll explore the 6 bands George Michael reportedly hated the most, and why he felt so strongly about them. From clashing artistic values to outright annoyance, these choices reveal a lot about the man behind the music. So buckle up, because George Michael's honesty might surprise you. In the 1990s, Oasis dominated the British music scene with their loud guitars, swaggering attitude, and constant media drama. For many, they were the voice of a generation. But for George Michael, Oasis represented almost everything he disliked about modern rock culture. George criticized Noel and Liam Gallagher's constant arrogance, once remarking that their attitude was toxic for British music. While the Gallagher brothers thrived on controversy and public fights, George believed real artistry required humility and emotional honesty. In one interview, he openly mocked Oasis for recycling Beatles riffs and trying too hard to be legends. His dislike wasn't just about the music, it was about values. George despised the macho post-touring and laddish culture that Oasis embodied. He thought they sent the wrong message, especially to young men who idolized their bad boy behavior. George valued vulnerability and emotional openness, which is the opposite of Oasis's beer-swilling bravado. Behind the scenes, George was also annoyed at how Oasis disrespected other artists. Liam Gallagher often insulted pop stars, including Madonna and Robbie Williams. George, who was fiercely protective of the pop genre, saw Oasis's attitude as hypocritical. They dismissed pop music as fake, yet they carefully crafted their own image just as much as any boy band. In short, George saw Oasis not as revolutionaries, but as self-absorbed pretenders, and he never hid his disdain. George Michael may have been a pop idol, but he appreciated great musicianship. That said, one rock band that rubbed him the wrong way was Guns N' Roses. Their mix of sleaze, rebellion, and raw power made them global icons in the late 80s, but George saw them differently. He wasn't impressed by their shock value lyrics or their controversial reputation. In one candid conversation, George reportedly referred to Guns N' Roses as a parody of rock excess. He couldn't understand why so many people praised them for behavior he considered childish and destructive. George particularly disliked Axl Rose's infamous rants and outbursts. Where George saw music as a unifying force, Axl often seemed intent on dividing audiences with his aggressive personality and homophobic slurs. George, who had struggled with his own sexuality in the public eye, took personal offense at the band's infamous track One in a Million, which included controversial lyrics about immigrants and gay people. This wasn't just about music, it was about values. George Michael fought for equality and inclusivity, often using his fame to support LGBTQ+ causes. Guns N' Roses, on the other hand, symbolized a toxic form of rock culture that excluded and insulted minorities. For George, the Sex Pistols are often credited with kickstarting the punk revolution in the late 1970s, tearing down the old rules of rock and ushering in an era of raw rebellion. But George Michael wasn't buying into the hype. He once dismissed the Sex Pistols as a manufactured outrage, comparing them to a boy band dressed up in ripped clothes. For George, their supposed authenticity was just another marketing trick. George's criticism of the Sex Pistols went deeper than just disliking punk music. He believed they lacked true artistry. Where some saw Johnny Rotten as a fearless leader, George saw someone who relied more on attitude than musical ability. He was frustrated by the idea that shock value alone could make someone a rock icon. In George's eyes, the Pistols weren't creating art. They were creating noise for headlines, and considering how much George valued melody, harmony, and emotional storytelling in his own music, it's no surprise he found punk's raw chaos unappealing. What really irritated George was how the Sex Pistols dismissed pop music as meaningless fluff. To him that was ironic, since he felt their own songs carried very little depth or emotional weight. He once quipped that the Sex Pistols were the ultimate example of style over substance, and he had no respect for that. This one might shock some fans. George Michael, despite being a pop superstar himself, had very little patience for the Spice Girls. In the mid-90s, the Spice Girls were everywhere, championing girl power and selling millions of records. Yet George wasn't impressed. He considered them the ultimate manufactured product, a band carefully pieced together by managers with songs designed purely for commercial success. George wasn't against pop as a genre. After all, he was one of the greatest pop icons ever. But he strongly believed that great pop came from genuine artistry, not marketing to eames. He respected acts like Prince or Madonna, who pushed boundaries creatively, but he felt the Spice Girls lacked that depth. In private conversations, George joked about how every Spice Girls track sounded like a jingle rather than a song. He disliked the idea that 5 people with minimal songwriting skills could be packaged as cultural revolutionaries. To him, the hype around them was exaggerated, and their music didn't stand the test of time. This didn't mean he disliked the members personally. He actually got along with some of them in celebrity circles. But when it came to their music, George Michael didn't mince words. He thought it was shallow, predictable, and undeserving of the critical praise it sometimes received. By the 2000s, Coldplay had become one of the biggest bands in the world, selling out stadiums and topping charts worldwide. But George Michael was famously unimpressed. He once described Coldplay's sound as music for people who don't really like music, a brutal jab at their reputation for safe, predictable songs. While millions adored Chris Martin's heartfelt ballads, George thought the band played it too safe, never taking risks or challenging listeners. George was a perfectionist in the studio, but he also valued boldness. He admired artists who reinvented themselves, like David Bowie or Prince. To him, Coldplay stuck to a formula: gentle piano chords, simple lyrics about love, and stadium-friendly choruses. While that formula made them rich and beloved, George felt it lacked true artistry.